Hi, it's Pastor Pam. I want to catch you up on the Keep, Start, Stop meeting that happened tonight. This was a meeting that came out of the Leaders Advance. And the purpose of this meeting was to get the board, the ministry heads, and the staff together to begin to take a comprehensive look at Calvary's calendar and to figure out how we can do fewer things deeply. And so we at this meeting we started off with a time of scripture, and so I just want to tell you what that passage was in case you would like to also read it. So we looked at Luke 24, verses 36 through 53. This is the Luke version of the Great Commission. At Calvary, we hear a lot about the Matthew Great Commission because that's our vision. Our vision is to go and make disciples. And so since James preached on that recently, we wanted to do Luke just to get that same idea, but in some different words. And so if you read that, I hope that you will enjoy what the Lord calls us to. Okay, so we started with that, and then we got into Calvary's vision, right? So I just said it. Our vision is to go and make disciples, and so our mission for doing that, our way to do that, is through the E's, and hopefully you've heard those. If you've been around Calvary for a while, I'm sure you have. That's to elevate, embrace, engage, and enlarge. And so those E's kind of sum up what church is called to do in Scripture. And so, but what we want to do with those E's is we want to revitalize them a bit and turn each one into a sentence that really captures what Calvary is all about. So when you go through them all, in a year, be awesome if every person who calls Calvary home, they just knew they could rattle that off, because that is who we are and how we worship the Lord. And so, so what we talked about is that kind of the conclusions we came to on this was that elevate has to centers around our worship. And so, of course, worship is something we do with our entire lives, but kind of the direction the conversation went tonight onto how we might talk about elevate is really centered on how we worship and pray together, what happens in the gathering on Sundays. And then embrace, we talked about, kind of came up this idea of hugging. And so the idea was hugging each other in the church. So how do we care for each other and grow together? Engage would be looking outward. So how do we engage with local missions? And how do we engage with global missions? And then finally, we have enlarge. So enlarge has long been part of the 4 C's, but Pastor James presented the idea that if we're doing those other 3, then it naturally comes to enlarging. And so as we work into to revitalizing these words and kind of redefining them for Calvary, that one may slide off and we focus on the other 3, knowing that ultimately it leads to enlarging our faith, enlarging the energy that we have as a community, and maybe enlarging numbers as well. But really growth, that sense of enlarging is what happens when we do the other E's. So then what we did is we looked at 9 categories that a healthy missional church has, and 9 categories is way too many really to process, but we needed a starting point. So we have 9. So I want to tell you about them because they kind of play into everything else I'm going to say on this video. So these 9 areas is 1, our corporate worship time, so the gathering. Then we have small groups, some sort of know and be known community. As you know, that is something that we have to define this summer. We're going to look at that in another meeting format. Then next we have next generation. Next generation definitely includes kids and teenagers. Does it include college? Well, of course, college students are next generation, but in terms of ministry structure, we have to figure that out. If it's a local mission kind of thing that we're doing with college students, or is it something that it's a small group, or, what does that look like? We have to figure that out. So, so maybe next generation might fall under there, but maybe it will end up fitting better somewhere else. We're not sure yet. Okay, then we have local missions, and then we have global missions. The sixth category is serving. And when I say serving, what I'm talking about in this case is serving inside the walls of the church. And so, like, what's your ministry at Calvary? And, these terms aren't set. They're not perfect. As we learned in our conversation, they can be confusing at times. And so this is all just an ongoing process. So thanks for being a part of it. Okay, number 7 would be community care. And what I mean by community care is how we care for each other in the church. When someone is in the hospital, how do we visit them? What does that look like? When someone has a baby, how are we getting meals to them? What are the structures for that? Is it a department? Is it a function of small groups? Again, we're gonna work through that this summer, and I think there's some really exciting possibilities for how we love on each other in the church and continue to develop that. So that would fall under that community care piece. And then the last one that's on there is leadership development. At our Leaders Advance, we talked about silo ministries and that's not how we want to do this. And so we need to have leadership development. And so then what we did is we figured out how each of those 8 fit under the E's, the 3 E's, because we had taken out the enlarge component. And then Pastor James talked about missional footprint. So here's what missional footprint is. Pastor James said, like, imagine a bucket and he puts his foot in a bucket of water. What happens to the water? Well, the water is displaced, right? So there's like a footprint, there's an impact that's there. There's ripples that come out from that. And so as we're thinking about how we refocus the things that Calvary does, we want to be picking the things that have the greatest missional focus. So he introduced that concept to us, and we just kind of got into the beginning threads of it, but it's a good concept to know. Because for our next activity, I handed out a list of 110 things that Calvary does. Really, 110. Now, this did cover everything from like a night of worship that we had at Thanksgiving, to Sunday morning service, to communion, to a women's retreat, to kids' night at Chuck E. Cheese. I tried to cover everything I could possibly cover, and that came from announcements over the past 2 years, our State of the Church address, and then our church website. And what we learned in looking at that list and then trying to take those 110 things and divide them up into those 8 categories I just told you about. Let me just show you a little bit of what we did here. It was really, really hard. We learned 110 things is like way too much to even process, let alone put in categories. We learned that there are things on that list that people in that room who were leaders, that they didn't know what they were. And so that was really helpful to understand kind of that there's some missing communication about those things, that we all agree that's too much. It's too many things. And so we got to keep working with that. And of course, the things on there that like make church that come from straight scripture that we have to do, something like communion or baptism, those things aren't on there because they're in any way up for debate. They're there because it helps us as leaders think about what kind of support do those things need. Those things have to be the top priority in what we do. And so what how do we honor them? How many times a year do we do baptisms and details like that? So we did that exercise, and it was a hard exercise, and it definitely got conversation going in the laughter side and in the tension side. And so another big takeaway from that was that in order to move forward in kind of focusing our church calendar into fewer things that we do really well and do deeply, is that the size group we had tonight, every person there is such a wonderful blessing to Calvary. But it was just not like a size that made that manageable. And so the decision that the group made was that for our next Keep, Start, Stop meeting. We want the heads of ministries there, and we're going to schedule around them. And this meeting we scheduled kind of based on calendar and critical mass as an introduction. But for the next one, we have to take a more personal approach to scheduling that. And so those roughly, those 8 categories I mentioned. So imagine somebody who's in charge of each one of those, which I think that we have, where we can figure out pretty easily, plus the pastors. And so those folks will get together to look at the calendar and look at the list and make those decisions. And the group generously kind of authorized that group to do that, and then to report back, to come back and allow the larger group of leaders to ask questions and find out how that process went, so that everyone can feel that it's transparent and have ownership as we move forward into leaning into Calvary's positives and where our vision and mission is taking us to go and make disciples in our church, in our local community, and in the world around us. So that's really exciting. And I will tell you more as it happens. Thanks for listening.